Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating piece of political discourse. We're looking at a recent News 24 segment that featured One Nation's Lee Hansen and independent Kristen Abrams. Now look, immigration is a complex, heavily debated topic, but we aren't here to take sides today. Instead, we're going to act as your analytical guides. By mapping out the exact arguments, the data points, and the policy proposals from this broadcast, we can actually get a much better understanding of the mechanics behind the migration debate, and honestly, how the news you watch every single day is constructed. So let's get right into it. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the migration poll results, then One Nation's policy proposal, the DFAT travel list, critiques of government action, and finally, historical visa comparisons. Section 1. The migration poll results, looking at public sentiment on immigration. So, every political argument needs a solid foundation, right? Well, in this broadcast, that foundation is a very specific number, 54%. According to the segment, Lee Hansen anchors her whole argument on a recent poll indicating that a 54% majority of Australians are actively concerned about migration. But it's not just a vague sort of worry. The interviewees highlight that this majority genuinely lacks confidence in the government's ability to manage the sheer volume of arrivals across all these different visa categories. For Hansen, this isn't just a random statistic, it's a mandate. She uses it to validate her stance, while explicitly claiming the government relies on organizations that, in her words, carry water for them just to hide this reality. Understanding exactly how this data is wielded really helps us see how public sentiment is used to build political pressure. Let's move to Section 2 and see how this builds. One Nation's policy proposal, tying immigration to travel advisories. All right, so having established that public concern, the interviewees immediately pivot to a solution. Lee Hansen preempts her critics by directly addressing accusations of racism. She argues that One Nation absolutely isn't playing the race card here. Instead, they're proposing to restrict immigration using a firmly established national security baseline, which is the DFAT Do Not Travel list. Now, if you're not familiar, this is an official government advisory list that points out countries or specific zones deemed completely unsafe for Australians to visit. The logic they present is essentially a two-way street. If an Australian shouldn't travel to a specific region because of extreme danger, then individuals from those exact same regions should not be granted visas to enter Australia. Moving on to Section 3, the DFAT travel list, analyzing the numbers and regions. Now, what's really interesting about this is what the actual data looks like according to the panel. Lee Hansen makes a core statistical claim here. In the 2024 to 2025 period, 7.5% of immigrants coming into the country originated from these specific DFAT Do Not Travel zones. Just think about that 7.5% figure for a second. For the interviewees, this represents a totally unacceptable national security blind spot. They argue that this is exactly where the government needs to step up and reduce numbers, framing the whole thing strictly as an issue of citizen safety rather than any sort of discrimination. To make this abstract policy idea concrete, the host of the segment actually reads directly from the news story and the Smart Traveler website to list some of the specific countries currently flagged on this Do Not Travel list. Those include Pakistan, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Cameroon, and Algeria, among quite a few others. By naming these specific nations, the broadcast really aims to solidify the argument for the viewer. The host, Paul, explicitly states that checking this list should literally be the threshold for entry. Though it is important to note that the host clarifies they are talking about standard orderly migration here. They explicitly separate this proposed restriction from the official refugee system. But, the conversation goes even further than that. Independent candidate Kristen Abrams takes a much more stringent stance, stating, quote, "We shouldn't be accepting anyone from any country if they pose any kind of national security risk." Basically, Abrams argues that One Nation's policy doesn't actually go far enough. Her baseline is absolute assurance. She believes that if Australian government agencies cannot provide a 100% ironclad guarantee that an individual poses zero national security risk, and that's regardless of whether their home country is on the default list or not, then that person simply shouldn't be allowed into the country, period. Section 4, critiques of government action, looking at accusations of inaction and denial. And this brilliantly illustrates a really stark ideological clash. On one hand, we have the panel's proposed action, decisively restrict migration using those DFAT advisories. Contrasting that is exactly how the panel characterizes the current government stance. Lee Hansen literally calls their approach head in the sand. She claims they deny there's even a problem, that they lie about their intentions, and ultimately that they plan to maintain current numbers out of this paralyzing fear of being labeled racist. And the host completely agrees, suggesting the government is only going to try to handle any changes on the absolute edges, rather than through any bold, standalone policy shifts. To back up this massive claim of government inaction, the interviewees point to specific visa categories where they say the government is totally failing to provide a solid plan. They highlight student visas, bridging visas, partner visas, and even skilled migration. Hansen challenges the government's management across the entire board. She even questions whether Australia is selecting the right categories of skilled migrants in the first place, let alone properly managing the massive intake from all those other streams. The assertion here is pretty undeniable. They believe the system is broken across multiple distinct pathways, and that current leadership has zero intention of actually reducing the numbers in any of them. Section 5. Historical visa comparisons, drawing parallels to past policies. So the crucial point in the final stretch of this segment is when the host, Paul, uses the past to kind of seed doubt about the present. He asks viewers to recall a situation from about a decade ago, and he breaks it down into a very clear progression. Step 1. 50,000 people arrive by boat. Step 2. Those individuals are placed on temporary protection visas. And step 3, he claims that with, quote, one stroke of a pen, those temporary visas magically disappeared and were converted into permanent residency. Paul uses this specific historical narrative as a direct warning. He predicts that while we might not see physical border crossings anytime soon, people who are currently here on temporary visas or who broke the rules to get or stay here will eventually be granted permanent status in a very similar stroke of a pen. And wow, that brings us to the end of our breakdown. We've watched how a single poll regarding 54% of the population managed to spark a massive conversation that spanned national security, intense government critiques, and deep historical grievances. The debate over migration is clearly fueled by a really complex mix of data and deep-seated political distrust. So I want to leave you with this question. How will public polling, combined with these lingering historical fears, continue to shape immigration policy in the halls of power? It's definitely a question that's sure to define our upcoming political cycles. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Until next time, keep asking questions and keep learning.